Hey everyone, if you're really into current affairs, especially those of you working towards the UPSC exams, mains, prelims, you know that getting a handle on those regional stories is a big deal.
Oh, yeah, it's huge.
Right. So today we're going to dive deep into what's going on in Meghalaya,
That's right.
this northeastern state. There's some real interesting stuff happening there when it comes to development and how things are moving forward.
Yeah, and we've been looking closely at the reporting. The Indian Express has done some great work on this.
Yeah.
Getting a sense of where railway connectivity stands in Meghalaya,
Yeah.
it's not straightforward at all.
No, not about.
It really raises those fundamental questions, right?
Yeah.
About how you balance economic progress with protecting cultural identity, which I think is a debate that's relevant all across India.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's this tension, right? On the one hand, we've got these clear economic advantages that railways can bring to a state like Meghalaya.
Right.
On the other hand, you have this really strong opposition. In certain areas, people are deeply concerned about what an influx of people from outside might mean for the indigenous communities there.
And you know what makes this even more interesting is the starting point for all of this. Meghalaya's railway infrastructure is incredibly limited.
Yeah.
Think about it. Shillong, the state capital, is the only state capital in the whole country without any rail connectivity.
It's really striking when you put it that way.
And there's just one operational station,
Yeah.
way over in Mendipathar.
Right, Mendipathar. And that's where we'll start today, Mendipathar.
That's right.
So our goal is to look at where these railway projects actually stand right now in Meghalaya.
Yep.
Explore why there's so much pushback in some places. It's not just a little bit of opposition. It's been going on for a while.
Exactly.
We want to look at both sides, why people are for it, why people are against it.
Absolutely.
And give you that clear picture, comprehensive picture of what's happening. And hopefully that'll be helpful for those of you preparing for the UPSC exams.
Absolutely. Context is everything, right?
Yeah, it is. Okay, so let's get to it. Let's talk about the current situation. You mentioned Mendipathar.
Right. Mendipathar.
The one operational station.
Yeah.
It's in the North Garo Hills region.
That's where it is.
So tell me a little bit about that station. When did it open? What's the situation there?
Well, it's been up and running since 2014,
Okay.
providing a daily passenger train service connecting the Garo Hills region to Guwahati over in Assam.
Okay.
So it's a really vital link for that part of the state.
Right.
And something I found quite interesting, just recently, the station got its first ever freight shipment.
Oh, wow.
So it's starting to play a role in goods transport, too.
Interesting. So that first freight shipment shows us something important.
Yeah.
Even a little bit of rail connectivity can open up economic potential.
Absolutely. That's the promise, right?
But things get a little more complicated when we look beyond Mendipathar.
Yeah, that's where the story takes a turn.
And we see those projects that haven't gone so smoothly.
Right, running into roadblocks.
Roadblocks is an understatement, yeah.
The Northeast Frontier Railways,
Mm-hmm.
the NFR had these big plans to expand the rail network. But it hasn't been easy.
Not at all. Okay, so let's talk about some of those projects that have kind of stalled. I'm thinking specifically of the Tatilia-Bernahat line.
Yeah, that was a classic example.
Which was, if I'm remembering correctly, sanctioned back in 2010.
That's right, 2010.
A while ago.
Yeah.
So the plan there, connect Tatilia in Assam to Bernahat in Meghalaya.
That was the idea.
Relatively short distance, about 21.5 kilometers.
Yep.
What's interesting is the part of the line that's in Assam, the 19 kilometers that's actually done.
That part's finished.
But when you get to the Meghalaya border, it's like hitting a wall.
It's like they just stopped.
It just stopped.
Yeah, all that effort.
But the connection isn't there.
The connection's missing.
So we've got this almost finished line just sitting there at the border.
Right at the state border.
And from a development perspective, that's frustrating, to say the least.
You put in all that work and then nothing.
Right. So what's the latest on that project?
Well, with all this pushback, and it doesn't seem to be going away, the railways are now thinking about just ending the line at the Assam border.
Seriously?
Basically giving up on the Meghalaya portion.
Wow.
And that's not just a delay, it's a lot of money potentially wasted.
It's a huge setback.
Yeah.
And then there's the Bernahat-Shillong line, sanctioned just a year later in 2011.
Right.
This one was a much bigger undertaking.
Oh, yeah, much bigger.
This was going to be a proper line.
It was going to be big.
So tell me, what were they thinking with this one?
Well, this one was a proposed 108.76 kilometer line with plans for 10 stations along the way.
Wow.
The goal was to connect Shillong, the state capital, to the national railway network.
Finally.
Finally.
Right.
And in 2017, the government even put aside a good chunk of money, over 209 crore rupees, for land acquisition.
Okay, so it sounded like things were actually moving.
Yeah, on paper at least, it looked like they were making progress.
Towards finally getting Shillong on the rail map?
Exactly.
But again, same story, local opposition.
Yeah, that's been the consistent theme.
Bringing things to a standstill?
Yeah, it's a pattern.
And in this case, it was the Khasi Students' Union, or KSU.
And the KSU, they've been very vocal.
They organized protests, and those protests, they effectively blocked any progress on getting the land and actually starting construction.
They've been very effective in their opposition.
And this is where things get even more complicated, right? Because the latest development is that the railways have formally asked for their money back.
Yeah, they want that 209 crore rupees back.
From the state government.
They're saying, look, we gave you this money for this project. It's not happening. Give it back.
Which suggests that they've given up.
It doesn't look good for the future of this line, does it?
No, not at all. So all those plans, all those funds allocated Shillong still doesn't have a rail link.
That's the unfortunate reality.
And it shows how much power those local groups have in Meghalaya.
Yeah, they have a lot of influence.
When it comes to these infrastructure projects.
Especially the ones they see as a potential threat to their communities.
Right, and it's not just, not in my backyard.
It goes much deeper than that.
This is about something much bigger.
Absolutely.
And it's not just the older projects that are facing pushback. Even new lines are running into problems right from the start.
That's right. Right from the get-go.
So tell me about the Chenjanath-Pur-Jawai line.
Yeah, this one's more recent.
Brand new.
Just approved this year, 2023.
Okay.
It's meant to connect Assam to Jawai, the biggest town in the Jaintia Hills.
Got it.
But here's the thing. It's still very early stages.
Okay.
They're just doing surveys right now.
Right, the very first step.
Usually the first step in a big infrastructure project like this.
But even at this early stage, there's opposition.
Already.
Jaintia pressure groups are speaking out against it.
They're making their voices heard.
So this resistance to railways, it's not just the Khasi Hills anymore.
It seems to be spreading.
It's going to other parts of the state.
Which suggests a wider sentiment against these kinds of projects.
Right. So we've laid out the situation on the ground, limited connectivity, projects that are stuck, and now new opposition to new proposals.
Yeah, that's a fair summary.
So let's talk about why this is happening.
Okay.
The fear of a large-scale influx of people from outside Meghalaya that seems to be at the heart of this.
That's the core issue, absolutely.
So the Khasi Students' Union, the KSU, they've been against railway expansion for decades, going back to the 1980s.
That's right. Decades of opposition.
And their main worry is that if you build railways, you'll have a huge number of people coming into Meghalaya.
That's their fear.
And they're worried about the impact of that migration on the cultural identity of the indigenous Khasi and Garo populations.
And it's not just about economic competition.
No.
It's about the very fabric of their society, their way of life.
Exactly. And the thing that keeps coming up is the demand for the inner line permit.
The ILP.
So for those who might not be familiar, what exactly is that?
So the inner line permit is a special permit that you need if you're not a resident, and you want to enter and stay in certain protected areas of India.
Okay.
It's already in force in other northeastern states, places like Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Mizoram, Manipur.
Right. Those are states with similar concerns.
Exactly. It's about protecting those communities and their land.
So the KSU is saying, look, if we don't have the ILP here in Meghalaya, and you open up these railway lines, it's basically opening up the state's borders with no control.
They're worried about what they call an unabated flow of migrants.
Right, and they fear that could lead to indigenous communities being marginalized.
Potentially even becoming a minority in their own state.
It's a deeply rooted fear.
It is.
So it sounds like it's not that they're against railways completely.
No, it's not that simple.
They just want safeguards in place first.
They want that protection.
Before anything moves forward.
Exactly. They're saying we're not against development. We're not against railways in principle.
But we need these protections first.
We need the ILP.
And they make the point that travel by road, you can monitor that a bit more.
Yeah, there are mechanisms in place for that.
But with railways, it's much harder to control who's coming in and who's staying.
Much harder.
So they see railways as a potential catalyst for really big demographic shifts.
And they're worried about the scale of that change.
Exactly. And as we said, this isn't just a Khasi Hills concern anymore.
It's spreading.
The Jaintia National Council, they're now voicing those same fears.
About the line to Jawai.
Right. So this is resonating with different indigenous communities across Meghalaya.
It's a shared concern.
And the JNC president, he's been talking about the lack of any real mechanism in Meghalaya.
To track and manage the influx of people from outside.
Right. Their worry is that without those safeguards, they're at risk.
Culturally and economically.
And that railways could make things much worse.
They see it as a threat.
So basically, they're trying to protect their way of life
That's what it boils down to,
from the changes they see coming with railway connectivity.
especially without something like the ILP in place.
Exactly. So that's one side of the story.
Yeah.
But for a balanced view, which is so important, especially for those of you prepping for the UPSC, we need to look at the other side.
But counter-arguments.
Yeah, because it's never black and white.
Never that simple.
So what are the main arguments in favor of railways in Meghalaya?
Well, one perspective you often hear is that the opposition we've been talking about, it might be a bit more strategic than it appears.
What do you mean by that?
Well, some people believe that by blocking these railway projects, the KSU and other groups, they can put pressure on the government
To do what?
to implement the ILP in Meghalaya.
So it's a way to get what they want.
It's a means to an end, some would argue.
That's a really interesting point. But what about the broader public? Are they all against railways, or are there different views out there?
Well, there are definitely people who say that most people are either fine with railways or they actually want them.
Okay.
They say the opposition is loud, but it doesn't represent everyone, and that better infrastructure is crucial for the state's economy to grow.
And when you look at Meghalaya's economy, it makes sense.
Yeah.
It's very reliant on small-scale agriculture, right?
About 75% of the population works in agriculture.
And the service sector.
Right.
But they rely so heavily on roads to transport goods,
And that makes things expensive.
which drives up prices.
Inflation is a big problem.
So railways could help with that
They can make things much more affordable
and boost productivity.
across different sectors.
Right, from agriculture to even manufacturing, which is limited but still there.
It's all about efficiency.
And we've also heard the Chief Minister, Conrad Sangma.
Yeah, he's been very vocal about this.
He's a big supporter of expanding railways.
He is.
What's his reasoning?
Well, he talks about the economic benefits, smoother trade, lower costs for businesses, more opportunities for local entrepreneurs.
Right, accessing new markets.
Exactly. He sees it as key to unlocking Meghalaya's economic potential.
And it's interesting, there are regional differences within Meghalaya, too.
Oh, yeah. It's not uniform across the state.
You mentioned that there's strong opposition in the Khasi and Jaintia Hills,
Right.
but the Garo Hills, it's a different story.
Many leaders there are actually pushing for railway expansion.
Interesting. So it's not just one perspective in the whole state.
Different areas, different priorities.
So we've got this tension, right?
The heart of the issue.
On one side, you've got those concerns about demographic change, protecting cultural identity that's driving the opposition.
Especially in the Khasi and Jaintia Hills.
And then you have the economic arguments for better connectivity, which is stronger in the Garo Hills.
And with the state government itself.
So it's about finding that balance.
Yeah, a delicate balance.
Between protecting what makes Meghalaya unique and allowing for development.
And there's no easy answer.
Not at all. Okay, so let's wrap this up. We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We've seen how railway projects are stuck, the opposition from groups worried about migration, and the demand for the ILP.
Right.
But we've also seen the arguments for economic growth.
Especially from the state government.
And that these views vary across different regions of Meghalaya.
The Garo Hills being a prime example.
So Meghalaya is in a tough spot trying to figure out how to preserve its cultural identity.
While also allowing for economic progress.
And this isn't just a Meghalaya issue.
It's a theme we see across India.
This balancing act between local concerns and national goals.
Yeah, it's a classic challenge.
Especially relevant for those of you preparing for the UPSC.
Absolutely.
Where understanding these dynamics is key.
It's all about context.
So this brings us to a question for you, our listeners. What do you think is the best way forward for Meghalaya?
How do you balance those competing interests?
It's a complex issue, no easy solutions.
But we want to hear your thoughts.
If you enjoyed this deep dive
And found it helpful?
give us a like, subscribe to the deep dive, and leave a comment. Tell us what you think.
We'd love to hear from you.
And all the information we discussed today is based on reporting from the Indian Express.
A great source for staying up to date on current affairs.
We'll be back with more deep dives into these important and complex topics.
So stay tuned.
Thanks for joining us.
It's been great talking about this.
See you next time.
Bye for now.